Hi, I'm Michał. I'm product owner at Hull, and today I wanted to talk about 5 signs your agile development process needs help and how to remedy it. I spent big part of my career as software engineer, then I gradually started to take some team management responsibilities, and recently I switched to product management area. Right now at Hull, I'm playing the product owner role in our Scrum process. I'm working on the roadmap and translating that into our immediate backlog, and then I cooperate with our development teams to put that work into the sprint schedule. As I was changing from the software engineer role to product owner role at Hull, because I did that internal rotation, we were working on adjusting our process, and we cooperated with external mentors and advisors on that matter. They helped us spot and define and address some weak points of our process. That's what I wanted to talk about today. And so, if you're a product person participating in your development process, working with different stakeholders and development teams, you may be product manager or product owner. If your company runs on some agile development process, it may be Scrum, maybe something different, and your company is especially still in early stage in the maturity, and also the size of the team is not very big yet, and your scrum process or other process is still being adjusted and it's not settled down, or maybe you're new in your role, so you are still trying to figure out your responsibilities and your relationship. I hope you'll find this talk helpful, and things I want to share are some signals. So these are not things which definitely break the whole process. So you may be still delivering good things, but there may be places you should watch out for, because in the long run, they may affect your velocity. They may impact your process, may make it less smooth and make it less sustainable, which should be one of the primary principles of agile, any agile methodology. So let's have a look in those situations where you may have some concerns and how to address them. The first one is your dev team says they can't start until they have more detailed specs. And the key part here is they can't even start the work. So you may see that some of the stories in your backlog are being slowed down because of that. And probably it's affecting the more complex stories, and simpler ones are going faster because of that. But you are getting this generic strong pushback on your backlog refinement meeting. So you hear, okay, we can't really look into that deeper because we need to understand first how exactly it should work in the end. What's the exact expected behavior? And that's especially concerning if you see that those specs, if you try to provide them, because maybe I tried, are not really very valuable. You feel like they are becoming outdated very quickly, and there is no big engagement on them. We are not working very closely to update them, which may be a separate problem, but it became obvious to me that as soon as developers were opening the code and going there deeper, they realized, okay, the reality in the code is much more complex than what was stated in the specs. It's easy to write anything, it's harder to actually make that difference. And it may be slightly weird why developers would like to limit their freedom by asking very detailed specs. Probably they have tons of ideas how to improve the product, and I'm pretty sure they would love to do it. They would love to have more impact on how the product looks and works. So it's pretty weird to hear that. And actually, what I've learned is that it may be coming from some past bad experience where they try to execute on some incomplete stories and they failed. And they failed because the provided requirements and criteria were either incomplete or just wrong. So somebody, maybe you, maybe someone else, didn't pay attention to those criteria and requirements. So right now, you're lucky. There is a lack of trust in the stories you are trying to push forward. So basically, in other words, they may be saying, okay, we tried to work like this in the past, but it didn't work out. We failed. So right now, please be very specific about what you would like us to build. Otherwise, we just are afraid of keep repeating that process. And thing which is very problematic here is that this spec difficulty, so to speak, or complexity starts to drive too much your prioritization. Obviously, every time you would like to take the value and technical complexity and see which stories are relatively simple but they have great impact and prioritize those first. But if you see that the spec difficulties starts to become the main factor or even the only factor in prioritization, then you are not able to perform your job anymore. On the other hand, you try to provide those specs and it seems like it's not helping the process. And actually, from what I learned, the remedy, it may be slightly different than providing those specs. It's about getting back to the basics, so making sure the criteria and requirements are clear and developers can actually rely on them, that they trust you, that you did a good job in figuring out what are the key requirements and key parts in the scope. So you are, drawing a border saying, okay, this is the area where you are free to work, but these are the key points you need to make sure are included in the final solution. Also, if possible, you may want to shorten feedback loops because if you work on something which then appears to be wrong, it's makes a big difference whether you work on a few days on that or whether you work a few weeks or months on that. And one specific trick I wanted to suggest to you today is to create spike stories, so slicing bigger chunks of work into some small step first, not asking your development team to commit to the whole feature at once, but saying, okay, let's do some exploration. Let's put together some prototype. Let's see how that would work or what it takes in our code to make that happen like that. Because in the end, you want to empower your development team so that you can build those specs as you work on the software and engage with the user, because that's the best way to uncover complexity and uncover those places where you need to make some behavior decisions. And you want to strike the right balance between too detailed specs, which are a waste of your time and others' time, and the ones which are just incomplete and they are not enabling development team to start working. But with the spike stories, you can create those together, so you can figure a way from your perspective how to make those first steps which will unblock your situation. Number 2, business stakeholders have suggested more upfront planning, and that specifically can happen when a deadline is missed or a feature was delivered but it's not performing very well. So it's easy for business stakeholders or the sponsors of the process to say, yeah, maybe next time you should have planned that a little bit better upfront. And it's first of all, there are two problems with that. First of all, probably you wouldn't be able to really plan it out, because if you are working in a truly agile environment and you are working on a complex product, there will be a lot of changes happening all the time. And even if your business side is pretty stable and there are not a lot of changes, priority changes coming from there may be a lot of changes happening on the development side. For instance, we created some solution, it works fine, we tested it out, like the behavior is correct, but then we roll it out to staging and then some production instances, and we figure out that the performance is a problem because it's not really able to keep up with the production load, and you need to get back to the drawing board, and it's constant, and it suddenly breaks your whole plan and timelines for that. And it means that the planning may not be possible at all. And what's especially problematic here is that it may give a false sense of easiness here. So other team members may hear that and they may think, okay, so the product owner didn't do his job because he didn't plan that good enough, and we failed because of him. So that may undermine your position in the team, and it also may cause a lack of trust in the future. So actually, if you start to think what the business stakeholders and the sponsors may be really interested in, they may be more interested about the timeline. If they are all okay with working and they promote the agile approach, actually they may be concerned that issues are appearing too late in the delivery cycle, or maybe they are communicated too late. Maybe you or somebody else knew about some of these issues, but they were not bubbled up correctly, and as a result, business stakeholders feel they are out of the loop. They are not being informed about those issues. Or the worst part is that they feel you have lost control. Okay, so now we'll give you a way to get back to that control by more planning, like, Gantt chart, and you will know who works on what, when, and what are the dependencies. Dependencies are important, but actually, I think it won't work, because no matter how good plan you'll do, it will become very obsolete and outdated very soon. So the remedy I would suggest is try to talk more about those risks, and as early as possible and as often as possible with your development team and other people, because other people may know about some risks. So you may have a story coming from one business stakeholder who's like pretty confident that's good story. Then you discuss that with your support team, and then they may tell you, okay, but watch out because it may impact some usage for specific users. Or in one particular advice, maybe avoid asking your development team if there are any risks related to a certain story, but ask them what are the risks, because there are probably risks everywhere. Some are more probable or severe, others are less important, but we probably want to learn about them as learn about all of them if possible. During the sprint work, I think it's very important to don't miss the stand-ups. There is always a tendency, which includes me, to avoid those stand-ups to save time, but there are really important information being said there, and if development team is alone on stand-ups, they may not really notice if a specific concern they have about the timeline or scope or requirements is really important or not, and you should be there to help them uncover those issues and maybe dig a little bit deeper to understand if it's really impacting the high-level roadmap or not. And demos and reviews can help a lot. We probably can do more of those at Hull, but from what I observed, even preparation for a demo is very helpful, because you start to ask those very specific questions. Okay, so what actually is missing from the prototype to deliver it to the user? Like how he would enter that prototype, like what the navigation would be, what will be the next steps, what will be the first screen he will see during the demo, for instance, or during some test review. And here again, you want to get to that planning sweet spot. So you can't tell your business stakeholders and sponsor, that's Agile, we cannot plan anything. Now we should be able to give them pretty good projections, saying, based on what we know today, based on our previous velocity, and based on our estimates about the size, this is what we should be delivering next 2, 4, 6 weeks. But going too far with the planning is a waste of time. And it's really important to get to that sweet point that you feel confidently, and other people in the team feel also the same, that you are confident with what you are trying to do. If you are trying to really do something unrealistic, you will fail, and that will undermine your position. Number 3, you as the product owner are the only one updating the backlog. While at first it may sound correct because you are responsible for building and maintaining the backlog, if you are not getting constant requests from both business stakeholders to change the priorities and scope of the stories, if you have like some technical stakeholders like solution engineers or support team, they should have very specific requests, like, is that feature included here? Do we talk to that API here? Do we plan to support webhooks? These are the kind of conversation you should be having. And if you are not getting similar requests from development team, like saying, hey, can we slice that story into smaller stories, or hey, can we just change the name of the title because we don't really understand what it is? It sounds like you are building the backlog in some isolation from others, and maybe you are doing a great job in capturing those insights, and you are actually creating great user stories. You may be missing that second part of reviewing what you have done and what you have prepared for the backlog. And that may mean that the purpose of the backlog is not mutually understood by everyone, because that's a very powerful tool to control where the development's efforts are going. And if people don't want to influence that direction or those priorities, it means that they don't understand what's the purpose. And from the development perspective, the backlog may be perceived as something already defined. So they may think, okay, there is a product team, they have defined the backlog. Now we should not ask questions, we should just execute, follow orders, and we don't have anything to say. Or maybe there is just no good space or time to discuss those updates. So as I said, you are spending most of your time capturing insights, creating great stories, but you are not spending your time reviewing them and making sure people can express their opinions on that. And actually, there may be some tooling or scheduling adjustments to find that time and find good tools to present that in an easy way. There's one specific thing which worked pretty well at Hull, was to introduce some high-level high-level reporting, and we introduce a flag on each epic, which could be green, meaning everything's on track, or red, that there are some risks for a specific epic, and then we review it on our product meetings when we look at the roadmap. That's very valuable. That's very concrete and simple to start very specific and valuable conversation. For the development side, you may want to do some additional guidance and encouragement to contribute. So ask them to create more stories, even though if you want be the one who creates them or edit them in that tool you are using, you may ask to them to provide you the content or titles or names, like saying, hey, send me that over the Slack or through the email. I'll just copy paste that in the correct place. Or maybe please go add it at the end of, or at the bottom or at the top of the backlog, then I will position it. Maybe in the end you want to have that final control on the backlog, but you should be going in the direction that backlog is engaging and creating good communication, good discussions, and it should be a great way for you, to take the current state of the backlog, present that to a stakeholder or development team, and go out from that meeting with a very specific notes valuable for you, saying, okay, this is the big that needs to be sliced down, or the priorities should be changed because I just learned something. And if your backlog is not triggering good conversations, then it means that it may be too technical and not really transparent, and you would like to make that a bridge between two sides of your process. Number 4, sprint planning involves you telling developers what to work on, and that one may be pretty tough experience. If your sprint planning is very hard meeting for you, you're the only one who's really talking and interacting. There is not a lot of feedback from the development team, and at the end you are like saying, hey, you will work on that, and maybe you will work on that, and that it's very hard, because it means that you are starting to micromanage your team, and if you are starting to do that here, then you need to continue till the end. If you are kind of forcing people to work on something, you need them to check what's the progress, if they are delivering and how they will deliver it. They may be less involved in the work actually and less proactive. You may need to check in constantly, and that's a great management overhead you want to avoid, because it takes a lot of time and you don't have that time. And if you start to think, okay, why developers are not very willing or motivated to pick the stories, the answer may be pretty simple but hard to solve. That may mean developers may not understand their stories or the stories you are presenting to them. And the root cause may be also very straightforward, that you didn't have enough time to refine and work on those stories prior to the sprint planning. So they are maybe even coming as a surprise to them. They haven't seen those stories. They don't really understand what the story is about, what's the goal behind, what's the context, what's the user. And if they would understand that, they should have a vision of how or why and how it's valuable, and what would be the impact if they finish and if they deliver. Or maybe you are doing a pretty good job for most of your stories, but there are some last-minute changes you are handling poorly. So there is a business stakeholder approaching you a day before the sprint planning, asking if the sprint already started, and you are saying, no, we have the sprint planning tomorrow. And he says, great, because I have 3-5 stories that we really need to start working on. And if you are making that mistake, saying, okay, well, we'll try to put that into the sprint, you are kind of surprising your developers, showing something new to them on the sprint planning, which they didn't saw before. So the remedy is pretty straightforward. Find enough time. I know it's hard to have yet more meetings during the sprint. Take your developers from their actual current sprint work and try to engage with the future work, but it's really important. And to make sure that the sprint planning in the end is something that you all are already more or less on the same page, and you are just finalizing some final pieces on the sprint plan. And for those last minute changes, there may be certain occasions that really significant changes are happening in the organization, or we just doing some strategic changes. I think those days it may happen more often, or we just figure out some competitive opportunity that we can take advantage of. So you may need to be open to change the sprint schedule, saying, okay guys, let's maybe extend the current sprint by 1 week, and we'll just take maybe some existing stories from the backlog, or extend the scope of the existing stories, or maybe work a little bit more on the technical side. for that 1 week, but we buy time and we get more time to work on those last minute changes, so we can prepare for working that, because you need to make sure you get the collective understanding of each story, its goals, and its requirements. If your sprint planning is just you talking and you selecting people and you planning 2 weeks of work for your development team, it means it's just you who understands those stories, and it's just you who knows why we should work on that, and you failed achieving the collective understanding. Number 5, you only hear about problems and issues that arise after your product feature has shipped. So when you talk about that, it's pretty obvious. So you get the feedback from your bug reports or some escalation process. So the support team is escalating issues to you, or your developers are working on some second line of support. And this is where you learn the most about how you performed when you developed a certain feature. And when you speak about that, it obviously sounds wrong. But from my experience, it can last pretty long before it's actually noticed, and there are some steps taken to address that issue, because everybody just tries to move on. So you finish one story, you deploy that to production, you take another story, and the development team does the same. And I think developers can go very long without saying that to you, that we are kind of not sure what was the impact of the feature we have built. And in our case, which is pretty specific, because we build a platform which is kind of set of generic tools and features which you can use as a user for very different use cases and scenarios, and those scenarios are very different from customer to customer. It's very easy for us to get into a vacuum or be disconnected from that actual usage, because we just changed some generic feature. So we don't know exactly if that impact we have made is resolving immediate problems of our users. In other cases, it may mean that there is not a lot of reviews and demos and testing out of the work you are doing during the development process, and there is no feedback or trying to get the feedback after the feature is delivered. But the result is that the only half of the picture is seen. Obviously, it will impact motivation and morale of your team and yourself a lot. It will also impact how business stakeholders may perceive your work. They only hear about issues, so probably your work is not really very good. And the remedy here is to, in our case, to get as close as possible to actual users. So if we are certain stories and we see that there is one story or a few stories that we have an immediate need, we have a customer, actual current customer, or we have a prospect who's, there is a blocker in the onboarding phase or some sales talk, we can jump in there, work on that story together with that customer or user or future user to resolve that problem. That's where we have a direct feedback from the user, and we know if we are doing okay or not. And then when the thing is resolved or the feature is delivered, we have immediate answer. Okay, that works. Maybe even sometimes we say that answer. We tell that answer to our customers. They are not sure if everything works. We are verifying that for them. By the way, it's also much easier to get good requirements like that, because you are speaking without specific people about specific issues, specific requirements, and specific needs. So it's much easier to get a very good picture of what needs to be built. Obviously, getting a good product usage analytics helps a lot. We use that more for our integrations part, where we observe how integrations are being used, who installs which connector, and if the data flow is passing, what kind of settings are used on a specific integration. Because in the end, Agile is about reflection and continuous improvement based on that reflection. So if you are not getting the entire picture, you won't get to good conclusions from your reflection. So you need that broad part, which may be bug reports, which may be users complaining, and you need that good part where you have an immediate verification. And if you are getting closer to that, you can do that reflection and adjustment much more often, so you are as aligned as possible to the actual usage of your product. And that's the thought I wanted to finish with, that I shared with you my reflections based on my time spent as a product owner, working together with other people involved in the process. What was good or what was bad in our work. And today I wanted to share with you things which weren't good, but they weren't obvious at first, and they were slowly introducing some anti-patterns in our work, and it was slowly affecting our morale and our relationships. So I hope it inspired you to have similar reflection on your work and see those places where things are not really smooth for you and there are some hiccups in the process, or things which are okay, but in the long run they may have bad effects on your process. Thank you for spending time with me today. Feel free to get in touch with me through the email address or connect with me on LinkedIn. And definitely, I invite you to check out our webpage to see the features of our customer data platform. And if you have organization that have sales, marketing, and CS data scattered across multiple tools, and it's hard for you to unify that under one profile of user or company, I think we can definitely help you. So please reach out to us. We'll set up some demo and take it from there. Thank you very much and see you next time.